This video will introduce you to the workflow for the OpenStreetMap map project that we will work on together this semester. 3 classes in total will participate in this project, so that means close to 30 students this summer are going to help the American Red Cross to map Harare, the capital city in Zimbabwe. The first thing we need to do is to log on to OpenStreetMap and create an account. This is what the OpenStreetMap page looks like when you first go to their page. To contribute to OSM, as I said already, you have to have an account. Accounts are free and it only takes a few moments to create. Click the Sign Up button in the upper right hand corner to start the process. You will enter your email address and a display name. Your display name is anything you want it to be, and it will be associated with every edit that you make in OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap will send an email to the address provided, and you will have to visit there to activate your account. Let's now go to OSM and we'll walk through this process together. So this is the OpenStreetMap website, and depending on whether you have visited here before, it will go to the last place that you've looked at. So I already have an account here and I'm already signed in, so I'm not going to go through the process of creating another dummy account. So if you'd like to pause the video for a moment, you can go to the login, choose the option to create a new account, and when you have that account activated, please come back to the OpenStreetMap website, log in, and then you can take back up with the video from here. So now that you've logged in with your new account, you can actually browse through OpenStreetMap with me. It's really just a free, open, editable map of the world, quite like Google Earth. And you can use a guide like Google Earth. You don't really even have to contribute data. You can just use it to navigate. You can zoom into different areas, or over here in the search area, you can search for a city you're interested in. Go to Washington, D.C., District of Columbia. Now, one thing it does do is it does zoom to the very, very, very center of the place you choose. It's kind of one of the little bugs I found with it. But as you zoom in and out, you'll see that it is a very, very, very detailed map of the various cities with all the buildings. Now, what we're trying to do for our assignment is we're trying to ensure that the cities that we're working in become just as detailed as the cities for the US. So if you go up here to the search area, excuse my caps, you zoom out, you'll see there's not near as much work being done in Harare as there has been in Washington, D.C. There's quite a lot of good road infrastructure, but not a lot of housing infrastructure, and that's what we are going to fill in as a group. I'd suggest right now, if you want to pause the video and maybe take a look at your town in OpenStreetMap, or somewhere you visited, or where your family is from, it would be a good time to do that, and you can rejoin me when you're ready. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to dig a little deeper into OpenStreetMap, and we're going to contribute to the existing data there, and specifically in Harare, as I already mentioned. There are various online and offline editors that have been developed for this purpose, and the one that we're going to use is called ID. Interestingly enough, it was created by a DC-based company called Mapbox. So we're going to take a brief tour of ID together to get us prepared for the mapping assignment. So we're going to go back to OpenStreetMap. So now we're back in our OpenStreetMap window, and it doesn't matter if you're not on Harare, it doesn't matter if you're in your local town, we can still proceed together from here. So you're logged in, we're going to go to the Edit button, and we're going to say Edit with ID, and ID, as you can see, is an in-browser editor. We definitely don't want to go with Potlatch, it's an older editor and it's not as good. And JOSM or Mercator, these are offline editors that you have to install independently, and we won't be working with those. Now is a good time to mention that ID works best in Mozilla or Chrome and even in Safari, but does not seem to work in the Internet Explorer browser. So if you're in Explorer right now, log out, Open one of the other browsers and log back in. If you try to access ID through Explorer, it will revert to Potlatch, and Potlatch is not easy to use. It's not what we want to work with. So we're going to click on Edit with ID. And you'll see we all of a sudden have a very, very different view of Harare. What we're seeing right now is kind of this wireframe street view on top of satellite imagery. And at this particular zoom, what I'm seeing for Harare is Landsat imagery, which is quite crude and hard to capture data from. So depending on what town you're on, if you're back in DC or in your hometown, you're seeing a different view and you're seeing a different quality of imagery. You'll see as I zoom in here, the imagery starts to get much better. If I go way in, I can see very specific houses. And this wireframe information for the streets and the buildings, it becomes much clearer, and you'll start to see that you have different symbology for different infrastructure. And this will help us along. So the first thing we're going to do before we embark on any live editing is we're going to go through the walkthrough. Now, Mapbox that created this editing tool ID, they have created a very good little walkthrough tool that helps you with the editing process. So I'm going to have you use their walkthrough because it does a very good job. So your navigation bar is over here, zoom in, zoom out, show my location, background settings, which we'll look at in more detail in a moment, and then the help toolbox. This is an excellent resource here, the help toolbox, and I'd advise that you take time to go through each one of these help items. They're very, very short, and they give you a good idea how the whole interface works. But the first thing I want you to do before you read the help is I want you to go through the walkthrough for me. So if you click on that, it shall take you through the walkthrough, and please follow through. This is dummy data. You all will see the same thing. You have to follow the steps in order for it to work. But please do this and then join me back in a few moments. OpenStreetMap has been shown to be an effective collection mechanism for infrastructure data. But one thing that is lacking is the ability to coordinate workers surveying in the field or working remotely. That's why we use another web-based tool developed specifically for this purpose, and it's called the OpenStreetMap Tasking Manager. The Tasking Manager makes it easy for administrators to define collection areas of interest and then collection workflows, as well as allowing workers to easily determine what areas they should be working on. Now, this was developed specifically for humanitarian use, but because we work in conjunction with the Red Cross and USAID on a regular basis, we do have admin access and our students are allowed to make use. So to get to the Tasking Manager website, you're going to follow this link. The admin, which is me, sets up the task to be worked on collaboratively, and then anybody else with a regular OSM account can participate in the tasks. You can't just change them or create new ones. So please follow this link with me. We're going to go to the Tasking Manager and log in using your OpenStreetMap credentials. So here we are at the Tasking Manager. I'm going to log in using my credentials, and it has noticed that I'm already logged into OSM on another tab, and it's just asking if I want to log in with the same credentials. So that's good because the two interfaces need to interact. When it takes you to the main page, by default it jumps to featured jobs. We want to click on all jobs. Okay? Once you do that, type in GWU in the search bar, and you'll see all the work that we have here or that we've done in the past or continuing to do will pop up. And the one that you're going to work on, the task, is called Harare, Zimbabwe. So click on this. So this is the tasking interface that we've set up for Harare. You'll see there's a description for the job, and this is basically reiterating everything that we've said in class, or we've given you in instructions. You're going to pick a task, you're going to trace buildings and any roads or any other infrastructure that you see. We're going to use the Bing imagery, which is the default imagery that comes with OpenStreetMap. And when we save or complete a task, we're going to use the hashtag here, GWU, and the hashtag Red Cross, and we're also going to note that our tracing source is Bing. This will make more sense in a few moments. I'll show you where to put this information. There's also a tab with instructions. So again, I'll show you how to select a task, but It's stating here that when you do take a task, you trace in an exhaustive fashion, okay? You're going to check out one of these little square areas here. We want you to trace as many buildings as possible within there to reach the quota that we're going to give you for the assignment. We don't want you to cherry pick buildings, just do the easy ones, because we will be going back over the area that you've taken, and that will feature in your grade. We want you to even attempt difficult buildings. If you're confused over something you see, you can take a screenshot, add it to your edit log, which I'll talk about in a moment, and you can discuss it with us. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick a task. Now, you can let the tasking manager randomly pick a task for you, or you can choose one yourself by clicking on the map. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to choose this guy here. So when you pick a task, it highlights in blue and it shows you the area that you're going to work in. Now, if you decide you want to work on it, it will lock it for you. Now, before I do that, I want to show you a few more things. If you think that this area looks really busy, this one doesn't really look too busy to me, you can actually split that task and it will split it into 4 smaller squares. Do not do this unless you think you potentially have checked out a very busy area. Once you split a task, there's no way to unsplit it. And we don't want to make the task very bitty over here. So we're going to work with this for now. But if you were to check this out and then when you saw it with the imagery behind it decided, oh my gosh, that's too busy, you can always go back and split it again. But we won't for now. So I'm going to say, yes, I want to work on it. So now I've checked it out. It's turned yellow. And I'm going to edit it with ID Editor. So what happens is I'm instantly jumped to another instance of OpenStreetMap. It hasn't gone back to the one that I began on. And the area that I have checked out from Tasking Manager is now highlighted in pink. So you're going to need to zoom in quite a bit in order to get to the area. Now you'll see, now that we've arrived in the area we checked out, there are quite a lot of buildings in this area. But I think I can handle it. I don't think I'm going to take it back and split it. Okay. So I would suggest zooming in and beginning in one of the corners of the area that you've checked out in order to do your work. Now, this would be a good time to point out the background settings. You're working with Bing by default, and by default, the brightness for the imagery is set to about 50%. You can make this a lot brighter. Actually, I think this one was on 100%. Or you can make it darker, because sometimes playing around with the brightness can help you appreciate roofs or not. Okay, so I'm going to tag a building here, or I'm going to trace and tag a building here, and then we'll talk about the right way to put attribute information into your building. Okay, so I'm going to click on this. I'm going to use the square corners tool, which you should have seen in your intro. So right now this is just a polygon with no attributes. Now the best that we can possibly do when working remotely is say that something is a building. These are probably private houses, but we're not even going to make that assumption remotely. The best we're going to do here is say that it's a building. So we go over to the attributes section, we click on building, probably a house, probably residential. We can't say for sure, so we're not going to. We try to be as conservative as possible. So I'm going to click on building. Okay. Now my building has been attributed. The background turns from white to red. I would advise that you save after every single edit, or at least after every 1 or 2. If there are any overlaps between an area you're working on and another editor, because there can be remote editors not part of your class, you will lose any edits that are duplicated by both of you. So there will be a lot less chance of conflict if you save after every edit. So I'm going to click Save here. Now this is where I'm prompted for a commit message. And this is where you give any information you have about the stuff that you've traced. So here, because it remembered the last thing I put in here, it's hashtag GWU. I'm going to add hashtag Red Cross, all one word, and I'm going to leave in here traced from Bing imagery. So in the record, this piece of information will be added to this building. I'm going to go save. Okay. Now you're also allowed as part of your quota to fix anything that you see you know, that you don't think looks good within the tracing here. So I'm actually going to straighten up these roads here. And what we do and how we count things up is for every 5 vertices that you either create or fix, you get building credit for, okay? So I've moved 4. I'm going to save those. The nice thing about the commit message is it remembers the last commit that I've used. So unless I want to add additional information, like any other reason I tagged a building with extra info, you know, based on ancillary data, you're not going to need to change this guy. You just click save. Okay. So basically, you will continue to do this to add infrastructure, work on this building, this building, this building as you move along. Now, some things are going to be very hard to interpret, like this guy. It's very hard to know if that's a building or if that's just concrete. So I'm going to actually walk you through a few slides that will help you in your interpretation. If at any point you're unsure what's going on, use Jing that we've had you install to take a screen capture of the area or the interpretation you're having difficulty with. Add that to a Word document that we call an edit log and type up what your problem is, and you can use that to communicate with your professor. But for now, we're going to go back to the PowerPoint and we'll discuss some editing technique. So you're going to encounter different land use density while tracing in Harare. Some of you on the edge may encounter some areas that are suburban heading towards rural. A lot of you will work in exclusively suburban areas, and then some of you will encounter more medium to high density areas. So just to walk you through some tracing etiquette. Working in low density or rural areas, you probably will be able to see things a little bit more clearly apart from some vegetation that might, make your ability to interpret the true shape of a building very well. Please do not assume connections in roads or pathways unless you can see them clearly, or unless you see a pathway enter into, let's say, a tree and then come out at the other side. It probably does continue under a tree. It is acceptable to have dead ends. Pathways do end in gardens, but only connect them if that intersection is clearly visible. Also, take into account that corners of buildings might not be visible because of vegetation, but using the logic and geometry, you should be able to complete the corners of buildings. Beware that you're also dealing with shadows because of angles in the imagery and also because of vegetation. So kind of use common sense and logic to fill out the corners of the buildings. And please do use the square off tool that I showed you in ID to try and get the shapes as regular as possible. Things are going to get a little bit more difficult when you head into medium density areas. Many times you will have buildings built directly onto other buildings, especially in a city like Harare, and it's going to get very difficult to distinguish between them. If you have very, very clustered buildings like you see in these images, we consider it appropriate to digitize them together as one clump and only divide them where there are very obvious streets or paths within them. Again, in some of these medium density areas, there will be footpaths or pathways between these buildings, and we do please want you to add those. When tagging these, there is a specific tag for paths or footpaths or dirt roads, so please use that. Do not put it in there as a for traffic road. So again, you're going to have issues with shadows here, so it will take some interpretation. And what I find is if you try to trace the more obvious buildings or clusters of buildings first, then it makes the ones in between kind of easier to identify as you move along. I don't think you're going to encounter any very, very high density areas in Harare. These particular images are taken from Kathmandu that we traced last year, but I do just want to show you what they can look like and how intimidating they can be. Again, we consider it appropriate if there's nests of clustered buildings where it's really, really hard to see if they share a wall, if parts of the buildings are overhanging. You can cluster those together, and if you do see pathways in between, please do trace those. Don't guess at them. Really only trace them if you see solid evidence of those pathways. So just a few notes on editing and tagging, and these I already mentioned in the walkthrough, but I just want to reiterate. Please save your edits after each piece of infrastructure to avoid any conflicts with other mappers. You will have many other students in your class working on this, and then there's potentially also people in Harari tracing too. So saving regularly reduces the chance of conflict. Please make sure you tag every piece of infrastructure. For the buildings, it will be as simple as building, and then adding your commit message. For most roads, you can probably tell if it's paved or if it's dirt or if it's a footpath, and please distinguish between those things. Now, some of you will have green spaces, or some of you may be able to tell if you're dealing with a building that is a school or a hospital, because there may be some text information that will help you with that, or there may be sporting arenas that are very obvious. And you should search in the attribute tagging system on the left-hand side of the screen. It will help you find these. There's also an excellent wiki that goes with OpenStreetMap that takes you through their entire data model. The data model basically explaining all the different tagging that you can use for the buildings, and it often gives you kind of photographic examples that will help you in your decision. As we've already talked about, we would like you to add the commit message, #GWU, #Red Cross, tracing source Bing, to each one of your additions. And as I already said, the nice thing is, if you're not going to change the commit message, it will remember the previous one you used, so you pretty much will only have to type this in once. I've already talked about maintaining an edit log. This isn't something that we're going to grade or collect from you. This is kind of more an archive for yourself, to record any difficult areas you've worked in, or maybe buildings you're unsure of that you want to consult your instructor about. So take a little screenshot of the area you're working in, just paste that into a Word document, and maybe add a little note about the issue that you're having. If you have any frustrations with the workflow in general, you can document those as well, and that really helps us improve this project, improve the workflow, and make it better for you guys going forward and students next semester. If you exhaust the cell that you have checked out in Tasking Manager, so you know that every building has been traced, every road has been traced, even if it's by your predecessor, you can go ahead and mark that as done in the Tasking Manager, and I will show you that in a moment. When you do that, it will ask you to add a note to describe the work you did. This can basically be a repeat of the commit message and any additional information that you might want to add or share with the OSM community. Please do not mark a cell as done unless it is done, okay? If you have reached the quota that we've asked you to digitize within a cell, or you may decide that the rest of the cell is too difficult for you to work on and you want to go to a different cell, just unlock or release it. Do not mark it as done. We don't like you to mark it as done unless it's complete. So I've just taken you back here to the Tasking Manager to show you what I mean by mark as done. So in the task area where you have checked out your task, there are two options. You can unlock it, or you can mark as done. You usually unlock something if maybe you've done a few buildings and you have to go take a break, or it's late at night. You release that cell back and someone else can pick it up and work on it in the meantime. Mark as done, we only do this when you are confident that every piece of infrastructure within that cell has been complete. And the reason we mark as done is it kind of helps us fill out the grid within the window here, and so our partners in the Red Cross can see our progress. You don't get any more or less points in this assignment for marking a cell as done. You have a quota we expect you to do, and marking a cell as done doesn't really have any part of that. It's just part of the workflow process that helps the Red Cross keep track, okay? So use this very sparingly. You might get to mark things as done a little bit quicker if you do decide to split cells, because you're then breaking it down into more manageable tasks. So that might be a good reason to split cells, so you do get the opportunity to mark it as done. So I want to talk a little bit more about the quota that you have for this assignment and the grading rubric that we're going to use. The quota for your assignment is to trace 200 pieces of infrastructure. So we kind of loosely interpret that as 200 buildings. Some will be easier, some will be a little bit more difficult. If you trace groups or nests of buildings, like in the high density areas, one will be considered one building. If you trace any road infrastructure or fix any infrastructure, you will be given one building credit for every 5 nodes. It's not the easiest assignment to make equitable, but we try wherever possible. Your final grade will be weighted on completeness. If you complete your 500 pieces of infrastructure, you will get 100% in terms of completeness, or your final grade will be weighted by 100. And then we start to look at things called quality, coverage, and sticking to area. So you can see the little rubric that I have on the screen below here. So in this particular example, the student was given 90% because they only did 90% of their buildings. This is just a fictitious grade. So the quality, which is worth 70% overall, they were given 60 for the quality of their work. So that means, did they trace buildings accurately? Did they, was the geometry nice and complete, or were their lines crooked? So you get an overall quality mark for that. Coverage means being really good about covering all the buildings within the task you checked out. We know you might not do everything, but at least you start in a corner and you span out from there. We don't want you cherry picking buildings within a task and then marking it as done, okay? I would rather you get 1/4 of one of those cells done and done completely, good coverage, and then unlock it, than just get your 200 from jumping all around that task. Then other people have to go back in and fill in the holes that you've left. So good coverage really helps us get the city complete, so we give you marks for that. And then sticking to area, you may need to visit more than one cell to complete your quota. It just depends how many buildings need to be traced within it. But we don't want you jumping all over the city to do this. It makes it really, really hard to grade. And again, it affects the ability of our partner, the Red Cross, to get that city done in a complete way. So there are some points going for sticking to area. The very last thing I want to mention with regard to the workflow is an additional website called Overpass Turbo. Now, this is a site that the instructors have used in the past to help us to grade the assignment, because we can search for the username of each student and it will zoom to the area, and we can interact with each little piece of infrastructure. If we don't think it looks very good, we can fix the geometry there, which is something we like to do to help our partners out. So it's just another way to interact with and query OSM data. Now, in previous semesters, students have seen us use this, and they kind of quite like the idea of being able to look at the work they did within the area. And it actually gives you a little count in the bottom right-hand corner telling you how many buildings you traced. So students use that as a good way to indicate how close to their quota they had gotten. So you can travel to the Overpass Turbo site. You navigate to the area you're working in, so you search for Harare, and it takes you kind of to the center of the city, and zoom out a little bit, and you can use the wizard button to search for your username. So the instructions are here, but I'm going to jump to Overpass right now and show you how to do this visually. Okay, so here we are at Overpass Turbo. So we're going to go to Harare. And again, it takes you in very close. You're going to want to zoom out, at least to this extent, because the wizard will use the visible extent to query. Go up to the wizard, and you will build your query just like this, user, and then you will type your username in here. And then you click build and run query. Now, I know I haven't done any tracing in Harare yet, so it's not going to pull anything up under my name. But when you have done some tracing, once the query has run, you'll see this little box down here, and it'll tell you how many polygons, so how many buildings, how many lines, or how many points that you've traced. So this is a really good way for you to keep track and see how close to your quota you are. So that is the end of the tracing session for the GW OSM assignment. If you have any questions about any of the things that you've seen in the video, or if you have any hesitation about the area you're mapping in, or you want to query any of the buildings or unusual infrastructure, please communicate with your instructor and we will help you through this.